Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, we've got people fighting back against rude neighbors, smug coworkers, power-tripping managers, and one OP tells a story about the time he follows his dad's exact orders and his brother almost died. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So to start, I was 24 years old and living in my first place on my own. I'd rented a townhouse and was putting myself through college, and this was back in the late 80s when even poor people could rent entire houses. Not a lot of money to spare, but I was getting by. Now, the townhouse was not detached. I had two neighbors whose homes were directly attached to my own. I got along fine with my southernmost neighbor, aka we said hi when we saw each other, but the other neighbor, well, the guy had a chip on his shoulder. The guy was generally rude if we bumped into each other. I would say hi or good morning, but he'd ignore me, scowl, turn away, all that stuff. I just thought to myself, whatever, no big deal. I just took it in stride. Being a struggling college student, I didn't have a lot of money for non-essentials. Most of the people in the neighborhood poured weed killers on their lawns every spring. I didn't do this for several reasons. Most important, I think it's a shame to poison the local water table. And while I love a nice lawn, I don't think you have to cater to grass. I prefer a more natural look. Back then, that meant regular grass, but with some crabgrass and dandelions. One day, Bob starts berating me over my dandelions. The guy basically corners me while I'm outside and he screams, "It doesn't fit the neighborhood. Don't you have any self-respect? You bring down the tone of this neighborhood." After that, every time he'd see me, he would tell me that I need to pour a weed killer on my lawn, which I explained I couldn't afford and didn't want to do. At first, I was polite, as I wanted to be on good terms with my neighbors. But that's when Bob starts getting angrier and more unreasonable. And he starts calling me, quote, poor white trash. One day, I'm coming home, parking in my driveway with some friends from school in my car. As we're getting out, Bob comes outside and he starts shouting at the top of his lungs, "Get rid of those effing dandelions." He looks over and now spots my friends getting out of the car. He's clearly embarrassed, but he doubles down and he starts talking to my friends. He says, "Did you know your friend is an embarrassment to this neighborhood? How does it feel to be friends with white trash?" I just about had enough of his anger by then, and that's when I snapped back and told him to F off and mind his own business. Several days later, I got a knock on my front door. I open up the door and it's a bylaw enforcement officer. He says he's responding to complaints of noxious weeds in my backyard, and he asked if he could come take a look for himself. So I take him through to the backyard and he sees lots of lovely white and yellow dandelions peppered all over the yard. He takes one look and gives a deep sigh. There were no noxious weeds, which I knew full well. The bylaw cop then apologizes for wasting my time, and he said that my yard was nowhere near a problem. He then left and went next door to chastise my neighbor for wasting his time. I stood at my front door and listened, and it was glorious listening to Bob sputtering and angry, trying to defend himself and vilify me, all to no avail. He screams at the cop saying, "My wife and I can't even sit outside and enjoy our backyard because all of those stupid dandelions." The bylaw cop just told him to stop harassing his neighbors and left, but listening in gave me an idea. I knew that Bob liked to sit out on his back deck in the afternoons, so I waited. As soon as I spot him out there, I walk into my backyard, ignoring Bob, as I gather up a nice bouquet of white-topped dandelions, seeds ready to disperse in the wind. We had this 4-foot-high chain-link fence between our properties, so the view between the yards was pretty much unobstructed. I then stood at the fence, locked eyes with Bob, and started blowing thousands of dandelion seeds into his yard. The wind was at my back, so the seeds were traveling quite far into his yard. The guy grows red-faced and he starts yelling at me. And that's when I say, "What's the matter, Bob? I'm just doing what you asked. I'm getting rid of my dandelions." The guy just yelled at me some more, but I ignored him. After depositing several dozens worth of dandelion seeds, he went back inside. And from that day forward, for the next several weeks, every single time I saw him out on his deck, I would go out and send more dandelion seeds into his yard. Eventually, dandelion season ended. I wanted to think that Bob learned a lesson about bullying, but he didn't. Yeah, as someone who's had to deal with an HOA Karen neighbor before, guys, I freaking love how OP handled this, and the neighbor deserved it, right? Like, why be that rude? Seriously, like, how insane does one have to be to fly into a rage, become obsessive over harmless, naturally occurring flowers, and yell at other neighbors over it? And I'm saying that as a person who loves having a green, lush lawn with no weeds. But yeah, just imagining OP blowing those seeds into the neighbor's yard has me grinning so hard, guys. So for a bit of backstory, my family's a bit of a special case. My younger brother, henceforth called Ginger, was diagnosed with diabetes type 1 at the age of 4. When my father was trained to manage his diabetes, he let his ego get the better of him, and he denied my mother and myself access to the free training course that was offered to the family to help keep my brother alive. His mentality was a too many chefs in the kitchen approach, but I think in this case it was wrong. That said, fast forward to recently. I live with my mother and he lives with my father. Most of us don't get along because anything to do with my father ends up in a crap show, but that's a story for another sub. My brother came over to visit a few days ago. While he was here, my father sent me a number of messages. I'll spare you the uncut version and give you the finer points. He wanted me to 1. Remind my brother to take his insulin. 2. Bring my brother home by 10 a.m. Monday no matter what. And number 3. Not to bother him if my brother's diabetes is acting up, such as ketoacidosis, low glucose levels, all that stuff. Mind you, I'm not trained to deal with his diabetes, so I trust that my brother's 14 years of having this condition has taught him what the correct course of action is for certain things. In addition, my father's old words, "his diabetes isn't your business, piss off," still rings in my ears to this day. So naturally, I decide to comply as maliciously as possible while keeping my brother alive. So the day this happened, my bro forgets to take his late night insulin on Saturday and Sunday, despite me reminding him. From what I understand, this causes him to have insanely high glucose readings during the night and in the early morning, which in turn causes ketoacidosis. The insulin he's supposed to take is slow acting and peters out after about 8 hours, designed to get him through the night. Naturally, he wakes up at 9 o'clock in the morning vomiting. Now normally, I would contact my father for how to treat this, but seeing as I'm not to disturb him, I instead ask my brother what he needs me to do. He tells me, "Can you get me a glass of lemonade and mix in a spoonful of sugar?" And here's a pro tip for anyone who's got a diabetic relative. This is the very last thing you'd want to give a diabetic, especially for ketoacidosis. But alas, I gave him this because hindsight is 20/20. He gets about halfway through it before he's spewing it back up. At this point, I have to get him in the car and back home to make the 10 a.m. drop-off time. So I get him in the car with a barf bag and we head to my father's place. When I get there, my bro's completely passed out. My father sees this as he met us in the driveway and he freaks out. He starts screaming at me and then calls an ambulance. When they arrive, I'm asked what he's had and what insulin he's taken. Paramedic 1 asked me, what did he have for dinner last night? To which I respond, mashed potato, grilled lamb, and assorted vegetables. They then asked, and how about his insulin? I respond, I don't know. Paramedic 2 says, well, for him to be like this, he's had to have missed a lot of insulin. Do you know what the last amount of insulin he had was? Again, I respond, I don't know. I'm not sure. Is it a pill he takes? Paramedic 2 says, a pill? Not for his diabetes. It would be a syringe or a pen. What insulins does he normally take? That's when I say, you'll have to ask my father. He was trained about this and he refused to train me. That's when paramedic 3 chimes in and says, really? Do you mind if we have a word with your father in private? I say, sure, go ahead. I then went to check on my brother while they spoke to my father in the house. My brother was given morphine for the stomach pains he was dealing with and some fast-acting insulin to try to combat the effects of ketoacidosis. He was in the ambulance, ready to be taken away. When the paramedics came back, my father looked more defeated than ever. Apparently, he had been lectured so badly in there for not training me or my mother, because the paramedics gave me a card with a number to call, basically ordering me to organize diabetes training as soon as possible. The ambulance bill was put in my father's name, and that cost him a few $100s. And for anyone concerned, my brother was taken to the hospital, and they put him on a saline/insulin IV, and he ends up fine under the hospital's care. Guys, what a frickin' mess here, and seriously, how in the world are you going to gatekeep your child's disease from the rest of the family is my question. Like, the too many chefs in the kitchen mentality put OP's brother's life in danger. And guys, a lot of people are arguing that this malicious compliance was a bit over the top and OP should have contacted Dad. And this person comments, I wouldn't be surprised if Ginger knew nothing about diabetes. Actually, it sounds like he doesn't, because after 14 years of managing diabetes, you should know that insulin is quite literally your lifeline. You should also know the difference between low and high blood sugar and when you should admit yourself into the hospital. Let me know if you agree with that comment. Also, some people are saying that the father might have kept everyone ignorant on the matter to make sure his son won't leave him to go live with his mother. I don't know if that's a reach or not, but guys, let me know your thoughts. So this one has a satisfying ending, and I hope you enjoy. Once upon a time, I worked in a research hospital coordinating drug studies. This one's gonna go against the grain of some of the other stories here. When you work in healthcare, following the written laws and rules to the letter is very important. We run into trouble when people begin inventing their own rules and playing by them. That said, the hardest part of my job was convincing other departments to also do their jobs. And sometimes it was like pulling teeth, asking people to perform their duties at even a basic level. Ask a nurse to do something they don't want to do, you get an eye roll. Ask the pharmacy to stay 5 minutes past the end of a workday? No, they can't do that. They were out at 4:30. The second scenario is the most important one for the purposes of this story. That department refuses to stay late. I could understand why they feel that way, but in the world of sick and dying people, sometimes things come up. So with that said, this hospital was in a very snowy metropolitan area, and one time years ago, we were projected to get a massive blizzard. Every one of us, the nurses, physicians, pharmacists, and coordinators had to come in, regardless of the weather. So every one of us should have been planning to be there the next day, even if the weather was awful. So the afternoon before the storm was due to begin, we had a patient in the clinic. Typically, patients on this particular research study got a doctor's appointment and then treatment immediately after. However, this individual had a job that made him prefer getting his clinic visit done in the afternoon and his treatment early the next morning. Now, this was unusual, but it wasn't hard to accommodate him. While most of us had accepted our fate of driving in the snow the next morning, the investigational drug department was especially not too excited about the prospect of having to come during the blizzard. So at 3:30, an hour before pharmacy closes, this Karen sends me a Slack message, and she asked what the possibility was of doing this patient's treatment today, so she doesn't have to come in tomorrow. And I just thought to myself, really, you're asking us now because this was on your docket all day? Anyhow, I begrudgingly went to find the patient in the waiting room to ask. He wasn't thrilled, but he says he'll do it if he has to. I let the pharmacy know. They then asked what the status of the patient was. The clinic was running behind as usual, and we had not cleared the patient for treatment yet. The investigational pharmacy needed at least 20 minutes to prep the drugs needed, so they told us we had till 4 p.m. to get them the signed order. Now, the process for getting a drug order filled involved getting a signed order from a doctor after a patient has been cleared to get a drug, walking it outside across the street to the pharmacy, handing the signed prescription to a pharmacist, waiting for the drug, and then walking it back to the patient in the first building. Now, this was absolutely not gonna happen in 12 minutes. At 4:01, Karen once again sends me a very rude message, indicating that I'd basically missed my window to get the patient in today, and that I should do better next time. The message said, if you don't come up and give a pharmacist the order by 4:05, there's nothing we can do for your patient. In the future, you should get the order signed and over to us ahead of time so we can prep it. Now, ahead of time in this case meant that a patient would be prescribed a drug but wasn't yet cleared by a doctor to receive that drug. In my training, the pharmacy director told us we were never, ever supposed to do this. It was a humongous no-no and would be grounds for a massive lawsuit if anything went wrong. You absolutely don't prep a drug unless the patient receiving it is cleared for treatment by a physician. Now, I really like the pharmacy director, and I message her regularly with questions about drugs. She wasn't super involved in the day-to-day of the pharmacy workers, and she tended to focus on the big picture tasks, hence why her employees were inventing their own rules and demands. Cue the malicious compliance. I thought to myself, I'm supposed to get this patient in today, right now, right? Okay, if you insist. So I got the order signed by the physician ahead of seeing the patient. Next step, in the words of Karen who messaged me, I was supposed to take it to a pharmacist. Not only that, but they said I had to take it to a pharmacist by 4:05, right? What if, instead of walking it directly to the pharmacy, I took it directly to the pharmacy director? She was still a pharmacist, and she could do everything the folks in the drug dispensary could do. I told her we hadn't cleared this patient, but I had been urged by the pharmacy to dispense the drug anyhow, so the patient wouldn't have to come in tomorrow for their treatment. The director looks at me puzzled and asked if the patient rescheduled while in the clinic. I told her no. This was at the request of a pharmacy staff member, so they wouldn't have to come in during a snowstorm. I then show her the message that Karen had sent me. The pharmacy director was unhappy with this and said that somebody would just have to stay late if this was the plan. That's when I show her the Slack message that said I had missed my window because they didn't plan to stay late. The director was livid and told me that she personally was going to stay late to make sure this went through. We went to the pharmacy from her office and she intended to scold this employee, but of course, everyone was gone. So the two of us went and we got the drug at 4:35 and I got it back to the patient. I got a call from him a week later indicating that he actually preferred getting Thursday afternoon treatment instead of having it on Friday morning, and he wanted to keep that schedule going. I relayed this to the head of the pharmacy, and I expressed uncertainty with how we'd handle this, and she said she would get back with me. We all got an email a few days later saying the drug department would now be staying open until 5:30, and one person would be staying late every day, rotating every day, so that somebody could cover the late drug orders. I knew she only had 3 pharmacists, and they were all salaried, not hourly, which meant some of them would be covering more than 1 late hour a week. I went to get this patient's next dose of drugs a few weeks later, at about 4:45. The Karen who had asked me to break the rules was working. I asked her how she was doing, and she told me that she was having to work 3 4:30s to 5:30s a week because she tried to act unethically a few weeks prior, and someone ratted her out. She handed me the pill bottle and she slams the window in my face. And to think, if she would have just shut up and done her job like she was supposed to and come in during one snowstorm, everyone would still be able to leave at 4:30 every day. If you work in healthcare or health research, don't make your own rules, kids. Well, if that wasn't karma hitting full force, I don't know what is. And I'm glad that pharmacy director held that Karen accountable. But yeah, what a way to learn a lesson though. You don't want to stay late one time, let's make you stay late 3 times a week for as long as you're here. Once again though guys, there are people who love what OP did and there are those who don't. This person comments, workers should not have to drive in a massive blizzard. Workers should get to leave at scheduled out time. Patients should get care from happy staff that isn't forced to drive in massive blizzards and stay past their scheduled hours. You are not the hero in this story. So about 5 years ago, I was working as a production supervisor for a metal forging company. We had recently acquired a transmission part for a well-known American motorcycle brand. This part was being made on a hydraulic press, and we had trouble with the part melting our dies due to the unique shape of the part and the fact that this part should have been made on a forging hammer press, not a hydraulic one. We were getting very behind on customer orders due to the fact that we typically had to either repair or replace dies approximately every 1,500 pieces. This is in contrast to the other parts that had dies lives exceeding 6,000 pieces. My manager, who had only been on the job about 6 months, pulls me into his office, and he tells me on the next run, do not shut down for any reason unless the forge press breaks down. I tried to clarify that the dies would not last, and I would have to stop the process occasionally to replace the dies. He was emphatic that under no circumstances was I to shut down the process. He even went so far as to email me a reminder of this. Hopefully you can see where this is going. So over the next run, we don't even stop, even though my QC guy's losing his mind over how bad the parts are. I tell him, don't worry, it's on me and my head, as he doesn't know about my manager's demand. We set a production record, even though maybe 1,000 out of the 4,000 pieces we produced are good. The next day, the plant manager and the quality director pull me into the office. It's explained to me that I'm gonna lose my job due to the fact that I blatantly allowed non-conforming parts to be produced. That's when I asked if I could print an email for my defense. I get quizzical looks, but the plant manager okays it. I then print off the email from my manager stating not to shut down for any reason and then hand it over. My manager gets his ass reamed and I get a firm reminder that regardless of demands, we must assure quality over quantity. And the only reason I wasn't terminated was the fact that I was acting under explicit directions from a manager. The manager ends up being let go a month later. Guys, I've said this so many times. I always love it when bad bosses give out dumb orders and they pay the price for it in the end. Thank goodness OP got those orders in writing. But yeah, my question is, what kind of manager didn't see that coming? Like, the quickest way to lose a customer is to deliver garbage, low-quality product, and this dude's mentality was, don't stop the machine, we'll just pump out bad products. Who cares? Like, maybe the guy wanted to get canned. So I was recently reminded of my own malicious compliance in high school. Way back in 2013, I was a sophomore in high school. And there was a tradition that on Fridays, the cheerleaders, football players, band members, and other groups performing wore their uniforms to class. Now, this wasn't a written tradition, and only the cheerleaders and dance teams' uniforms broke dress codes, but no one really batted an eye to it. I wasn't a skirt person, but I liked dresses once in a while. I also grew up in Texas, and it's still significantly hot in August and September. So one time, I was wearing a casual sundress in September. I was pulled out of class and reprimanded because the end of my dress was 4 inches above the knee, when the dress code said no shorter than 2. I then pointed out the cheerleaders and dance teams' uniforms every Friday, and how they reached mid-thigh at their longest. But I was told that was okay because, quote, students can wear official school uniforms. I was then sent home to change. What this person didn't know is that I was on the golf team. Immediately, my mind was turning to the next Friday. The school had recently upgraded the golf team uniforms the year prior, and the girls' team uniform consisted of a short-sleeve collared polo shirt and a skirt. If you don't know what a skirt is, it's essentially a skirt and shorts combined. It looks like a skirt, but they essentially act like built-in bike shorts, and these effing shorts were short. I'd even argue shorter than the average cheerleader skirt. So that next Friday, about 3 days later, to my parents' surprise, I was ready to go that morning in my golf uniform. I just said, "It's Fridays, we can wear our uniforms to class," and they accepted without question and took me to school. Well, by the second period, I was sent to the office yet again, and the first thing the assistant principal asked was why I would deliberately disobey her right after our last conversation. She then threatened a school suspension, saying I'll never get anywhere in life by not listening, yada yada yada. When I finally had a chance to get a word in, I said, "But this is my school golf uniform," and then pointed to our school's logo that was sewn into my polo shirt. I then said, "You said students can wear official school uniforms to class. Why are cheerleaders' uniforms okay and mine isn't? This isn't even a skirt, it's a skort, it has pants." I still remember how pissed off she was. She stared me down for what seemed like a millennia. She then snapped and told me to get out of her office and go sit in the lobby area. That I knew what she meant and she'd be calling my parents about this blatant disrespect. After about 20 minutes, she pops her head out, and in a very monotone voice, she told me I could go back to class, and to let the teachers know I had gotten permission from the office to wear my uniform. She then went back, closed the door, before I could even respond. I spent the rest of my day dealing with teachers questioning me about my outfit, and 1 or 2 calling the front office to double check my claim. I went to practice after school as normal before being carpooled back home. My dad met me at the front door with a small smirk, and I asked him what in the world happened, because I knew that he was the go-to contact for my school, so I knew she called him. He explained that when she called him and tried to get him to come to the school and get me and talked about punishments for my insubordination, he immediately began to argue with her, asking why I wasn't allowed to wear my sport uniform that the school provided to me, and then mentioned taking this all the way to the school board and resolving this obvious favoritism. He then asked me to not do that again, but that he was proud of me. And he told me, "I know I told you to never start a fight, but to always fight back. I always thought physically, but you damn sure took the advice." What a great story, great malicious compliance. But guys, let's not gloss over the fact that OP's dad was prepared for OP to throw down at school. Seems like a cool dude. That said, did no one address the issue that OP's skort uniform was so inappropriate that the teachers thought it broke the rules? That seems like a big issue that needs to be resolved. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in our /entitled people episode, where family members are crossing boundaries, demanding houses, and one OP tells a story about a Karen who moved in and would not leave. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.